My friend and I had been confined to my rickety old home for hours as the night was in full swing. The excitement was running riot as a result of the numerous spine-tingling horror films we had seen. Pile on piles of blankets, pillows all over the place, and almost no food left. The chill in the air started to permeate our bones as the clock crept closer to midnight, despite our resolve to stay up all night. No matter how many layers we piled on, the old house was always a bit drafty, and it never seemed to be enough to protect us from the chilly, dark night outside. We were about to give in to the comfort of our beds when it happened. The air was punctured by a spine-tingling sound that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. In utter terror, we both froze, our eyes wide as we exchanged glances. Unmistakably, the noise was coming from the cellar. In the pitch-black depths beneath our feet, it appeared as though someone or something was scratching the walls. The back of my neck stood up, and I could feel the uneasiness sweeping the space like wildfire. Nobody dared to move a muscle at all. The basement would occasionally shake with a crash, and a strange, rhythmic banging would follow. We were on edge because the sounds weren't coordinated. They resembled sporadic bursts of fear. The noises grew louder and more menacing with each passing minute, making the minutes drag on and seem like an eternity. Under the pressure of this unseen terror, the entire house appeared to sigh. It started out abruptly and stopped just as abruptly. Without daring to say a word, we exchanged anxious glances, as if whatever had been making the noise had been sucked up by the basement. We made an effort to reassure ourselves that perhaps it was just a rat or raccoon, but we knew in our hearts that something so small wouldn't make that much noise. The clock ticked louder as time moved slowly forward. Just when we thought it was over, the scratching started again. This time closer, as if that ominous presence were slowly ascending the stairs, agonizing inch by agonizing inch. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we grasped for air in shallow breaths. These mysterious, terrifying noises that showed no mercy encircled us as we were confined inside our home. Nobody dared to move. We felt as though the very walls were closing in on us and threatening to engulf us. Our wide-eyed gazes were fixed on the basement door as the night dragged on, and we huddled together for warmth and comfort. An unstoppable symphony of terror was created by the constant scratching, banging, and crashing. Although we didn't know what was causing it, we had all kinds of sinister ideas in our heads. The minutes passed while the sun stayed below the horizon. The only thing that kept us going was our frantic anticipation of morning. All we needed to end this nightmare was some daylight. The noise finally died down as the first rays of dawn appeared, leaving us in a trembling silence. We mustered the courage to go downstairs with trembling limbs while our hearts continued to race. We were terrified by what we discovered. The basement was filled with items that appeared to have been thrown about in a fit of rage. Walls, the door, and the stairs all had claw scuffs. It was incomprehensible. We didn't speak because we were too shaken to even process what we had just seen. The horrors we had to endure during our sleepover had made it into a nightmare that would never leave our memories. The events of that evening remain a mystery to us today. Our house went back to its usual, unnerving silence, and we never heard those eerie noises again. The fact that we had encountered something that was beyond the scope of our comprehension and that would always linger in the background of our memories served as a sombering reminder that there are things in this world that are illogical. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the first story. There are 2 more to come. If you like this video so far, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment so I can keep making this content for you guys. On a typical Friday night, I made the decision to invite some friends over and have a sleepover party at my house. The entire shebang was available to us, including the chips, soda, and board games. The night crept in as the sun bowed out. As we shared corny childhood stories and played practical jokes that had us in stitches, laughter filled the room. The darkness outside crept into the neighborhood like ink on paper as the clock's hands drew nearer to midnight. The snacks began to disappear and our stomachs grew bigger. Things started to become strange at that point. Every sleepover has its fair share of ghost stories and eerie atmosphere, but this was different. Inexplicable shadows were moving at the neighbor's house. We initially dismissed it as the result of our overactive imaginations going wild. When you're a teenager, everything is a joke, as you well know. We therefore made up absurd tales about ghosts or murderers in the effort to frighten one another, but the unsettling feeling grew stronger as the minutes passed. They kept moving, those shadows. Like snakes in the grass, they slithered and crept around. Fear and curiosity combined into a poisonous concoction. Jake, one of my friends, has always been a risk taker.
"Hey, how about we see what's going on over there?"
he murmured. We looked at each other, eyes wide and unsure, but eventually our skepticism was overcome by curiosity, or perhaps by a foolish act of courage. Ultimately, we were all involved. Our hearts pounded like the bass drum in a metal band as we snuck out of the house and blended into the night. The shadows seemed to take shape as we crept up on the neighbor's home. The movements were like erratic puppetry. They were no longer just shadows. Shadows moved in a sinister ballet of the night as they wriggled at the window and swayed in the garden. I experienced goosebumps as we drew nearer and nearer.
"Are those your neighbors?"
a friend whispered to me. Their faces were contorted and twisted in either pain or anger. It was impossible to tell when we arrived at their backyard. They were whispering to each other, so softly that it was unintelligible to us. Unnaturally and eerily, their eyes shone. My throat was held tight by fear. My friends and I looked at each other in horror. It seemed like something out of a horror movie, but I couldn't understand what the hell we were seeing. It was not normal that they were outside at this hour, and also looked so scary. Was this a dark ritual? Possession? Jake moved closer to get a better look because he's always the one to take the initiative. One of the neighbors abruptly turned to face us, their gaze settling on Jake's. We didn't require any additional prodding as a guttural scream tore through the night. Our hearts were racing like a drum corps in full swing as we ran back to my house. We went inside and locked the doors while panting like we had just finished a marathon. Our minds are working overtime to make sense of the illogical as our faces become pale. We made an effort to think logically and find an explanation, but in reality, there was none. The rest of the evening was filled with hushed murmurs and terrified looks. We couldn't get rid of the feeling that what we had seen was beyond our comprehension and much more sinister than a simple joke or miscommunication. We were kept awake all night by nightmares and paranoia. We tried to explain it to our parents the following morning, but they simply dismissed it as the result of overindulging in junk food and staying up for so long. Sincerely, neither we nor they could have understood. A few weeks later, I happened to see the neighbors again, but they did not seem abnormal. They even wove kindly at me. I didn't understand anything about the situation. Despite the passage of time, we are still plagued by that night. We've made efforts to forget it and move on with our lives, but it lingers in our minds like a splinter and causes constant pain from unresolved issues. Who or what were our neighbors that night? What shadows were they? What happened that night? One thing is certain, that sleepover changed us. whether the truth is revealed or not. As thin as a spider's thread and prone to rupture at any time, it opened our eyes to a world we had no idea existed. As a result, whenever we get together for a sleepover, we keep our curtains shut, our smiles a little forced, and our eyes constantly on the alert out of concern that the shadows might reappear, and this time, they might not let us escape. With bags of popcorn, our favorite anime series, and several ghost stories we had practiced 100 times before, Maria, Jake, Sarah, Chris, and I were all huddled in sleeping bags in the cozy living room. In our improvised fortress during our sleepover, we were safe and secure despite the howling wind outside. The giggles quickly spread due to the unique blend of fear and humor that only ghost stories could evoke. We spoke incessantly about our classes, our crushes, and other teen-related topics. Everything about the evening was going as we had hoped. The mood in the room, however, began to shift as the hours passed. Because of the terrifying stories, the shadows in the corners began to deceive our eyes. We began to feel worn out but still buzzing with adrenaline, so we tucked up into our sleeping bags. We believed that we would soon fall asleep. That's when it happened. A loud knock at the door. A noise so sudden and violent that it immediately jolted us out of the sleepover's cocoon. We held our breath and looked at each other with wide eyes. The room was dead silent, which was terrifying. The wind outside had stopped, so the only sound was the rain pattering on the windows. I finally whispered, barely able to hear myself over the pounding in my chest.
Did anyone else hear that?
We all acknowledged hearing it through nods and tense glances. Unmistakably, someone was attempting to smash the door down when there was a knock on the door. We untangled ourselves from our sleeping bags silently and stooped toward the front door. Chris, who had always been the bravest of us, grabbed the doorknob and threw it open. We all gasped in surprise when nobody was there. Both the porch and the nearby street were deserted and strangely quiet. There is no sign of any living thing. Sarah laughed shakily. She muttered, her voice shaking.
Must be some punk kids playing pranks.
None of us liked the circumstances very much. We stepped outside into the soggy night, huddling on the porch and looking for any signs of trouble in the pitch-black street. But there was nothing, not a single hint. Once inside, we made an effort to explain it away as the product of our overactive imaginations. Resuming where we had left off before the sudden break, we crawled back into our sleeping bags. The clock's second hand continued to spin, but the eerie feeling persisted. Then it happened again. This time with an extremely loud knock that shook the door. Fear gushed through us like ice water as we leapt to our feet. Jake's voice quivered.
Okay, this isn't funny anymore.
Hearts racing, we edged closer to the door and threw it open once more. The same outcome. An empty porch and a deserted street. It seemed as though the night had turned against us and was cruelly deceiving us. We stood there in stunned silence as fear erupted inside of us, and the feeling of fear was palpable. In an effort to learn more about these unsettling knocks, we called a few of our neighbors, but they had not seen or heard any skulking individuals. It seemed like we were in a scary situation where we all didn't know what to do. Our faces turned pale as we sat in a circle in the living room, our laughter having been replaced by apprehension. In case it was necessary, Maria held her phone close. Every house creak and every outside tree rustle gave us the chills. Then it happened again. This time, the loudest knock yet, as though whatever was out there was getting impatient. Without saying a word, we snuck up to the door and opened it. with trembling hands. Nothing. No sign of a living soul. As the evening went on, our nerves became irreparably damaged. The reason behind those menacing knocks was never revealed to us. For years to come, our sleepovers would be plagued by the chilling mystery of the outside darkness. Our sleepover came to an end in a crescendo of uncertainty as the sun finally emerged from the morning fog. The mystery surrounding the persistent, invisible knocker was never solved, leaving us with a spine-tingling memory that would forever haunt our sleepovers.